I installed an electric fence after HOA threats. Then I made them regret it in court. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Before we dive into today's story, I would like to ask you for a quick favor. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you will always be the first to know when we upload a new video. It only takes a moment, costs nothing, and is one of the best ways to help us continue creating touching and unforgettable stories for you. We truly appreciate your support. Also, we would love to know where you are watching from. Share your city or country in the comments below so we can say hello to viewers from around the world. Thank you so much for being here. Now, without further ado, let us return to our main character and begin today's story. I have learned that the loudest threat is usually made by the person standing on the weakest legal ground. The smell of freshly cut cedar still lingered in the warm Texas air as I tightened the final insulated connector onto my brand new agricultural electric fence. A gentle breeze rolled across my 5-acre property, carrying the sound of rustling oak leaves and distant cattle somewhere beyond the neighboring ranches. My work gloves were covered with dust. My pickup truck sat beside the open workshop, and bright yellow warning signs stretched along the fence exactly where county regulations required them. Every permit had been approved. Every survey had been completed twice. Every inspection had been signed. I wiped the sweat from my forehead and stepped back to admire months of careful planning finally standing in front of me. Then I heard tires grinding across the gravel driveway. 3 luxury sport utility vehicles rolled toward my entrance gate in a slow procession that immediately told me this was no friendly visit. Before the engines even shut off, I recognized the woman climbing out of the lead vehicle. Brenda Whitmore, the president of the neighboring homeowners association, walked toward my gate with the confidence of someone who believed the land already belonged to her. Behind her came several HOA board members carrying folders beneath their arms, followed by a man wearing an expensive navy suit who introduced himself as their attorney. I remained exactly where I was, resting one hand against the closed ranch gate while quietly reaching into my pocket to activate the recording function on my phone. My security cameras had already captured the vehicles entering the driveway from multiple angles, but experience had taught me that too much evidence was always better than too little. Brenda stopped only a few feet away, looked directly at the fence stretching across my property, and slowly shook her head with obvious disappointment. Without asking a single question, she informed me that the fence violated community standards and that the homeowners association would have it removed whether I cooperated or not. I calmly asked a simple question that I already knew she could not answer. I asked her to identify the document giving the HOA authority over my property. Her expression barely changed. Instead of producing paperwork, she simply repeated that everyone in the area followed the HOA rules and that I would eventually do the same. The attorney standing beside her remained silent, while several board members nodded in agreement. I noticed one of them taking photographs of my fence, while another pointed toward the warning signs as if they were documenting violations instead of lawful safety measures. I glanced briefly toward the nearest security camera mounted beneath the corner of my workshop roof. Every word, every movement, every gesture was already being preserved with the correct date and time. Brenda took one more step toward the entrance and confidently announced that if I refused to remove the fence voluntarily, legal action would force me to do it. I simply thanked her for making her position perfectly clear. That answer seemed to surprise everyone standing outside my gate. They expected an argument. They expected anger. They expected me to defend myself. Instead, I quietly watched them return to their vehicles while the afternoon sun reflected across the freshly installed fence line. As the last SUV disappeared beyond the county road, I looked once more at the warning signs gently moving in the Texas wind and realized something that changed the entire direction of the story. Brenda believed she had just frightened me into surrender. What she did not know was that every threat she had delivered that afternoon had become the first page of the strongest court case I would ever build. After their vehicles disappeared beyond the county road, I stayed at the gate for several minutes without moving. The afternoon had become strangely quiet again, broken only by the faint clicking sound of the electric fence pulsing exactly as it had been designed to do. I looked across my property and reminded myself why I had bought this place in the first place. 5 acres may not seem enormous to people who spend their lives inside planned neighborhoods, But to me, it represented something far more valuable than square footage. It represented peace, independence, and the simple satisfaction of knowing that every inch belonged to me because I had earned it. I had spent nearly 2 decades building my electrical contracting business across Central Texas. Long days, emergency service calls, commercial wiring projects, and countless weekends had allowed me to save enough money to purchase land where nobody would tell me what color my mailbox should be or how tall my grass could grow. That was exactly why I chose this property. Before signing a single document, I had hired a real estate attorney, reviewed every county record, confirmed every property boundary, and specifically asked whether the land fell under the authority of any homeowners association. The answer had been simple and unmistakable. It did not. That answer mattered to me because I believed ownership meant responsibility as much as freedom. If something needed to be repaired, I repaired it. If fences needed maintenance, I maintained them. If permits were required, I obtained them before beginning any project. My father had raised me to believe that preparation was cheaper than conflict, and that lesson had followed me through every stage of my life. The electric fence itself was never intended to keep people out. It was installed because neighboring livestock had wandered close to my property more than once, and local agricultural recommendations supported the type of low-voltage containment system I selected. Every material had been purchased from reputable suppliers. Every installation step followed manufacturer specifications. Every warning sign stood at the required intervals along the fence line so that nobody could reasonably claim they had not been informed. Looking back, I realized Brenda and the HOA had not appeared out of nowhere. Months earlier, small signs had suggested they believed my property should operate under their authority. An HOA newsletter had somehow been left inside my mailbox even though I was not a member. A welcome packet had been delivered to my front porch with community rules that did not apply to my address. Then came friendly invitations to neighborhood meetings that gradually turned into reminders, followed by letters suggesting participation was expected rather than optional. I had politely ignored them because I assumed someone had made an administrative mistake. Apparently, Brenda interpreted my silence very differently. She seemed convinced that if enough pressure was applied, I would eventually accept rules that had never been attached to my deed. Standing beside my workshop that afternoon, I unlocked the fireproof filing cabinet where I kept every important document related to the property. Inside were organized folders containing the deed, title insurance, county surveys, permits, inspection reports, tax records, contractor invoices, photographs, and correspondence dating back to the day I purchased the land. I placed the newest recording from my phone into a digital backup folder, labeled it with the date and exact time, and made 2 additional copies on separate storage drives. Something told me this disagreement had only begun, and if Brenda truly intended to continue treating my property as though it belonged to her association, every document inside that cabinet would eventually become far more valuable than either of us realized. The first letter arrived 3 days later in a thick white envelope with the Homeowners Association logo printed across the upper left corner. It had been placed inside my mailbox even though I had never given the association permission to contact me. I carried it into the workshop, poured myself a cup of coffee, and opened it slowly at my workbench. The letter stated that my newly installed fence violated community architectural standards and demanded that I remove it within 10 business days to avoid additional enforcement measures. What caught my attention was not the demand itself, but the complete absence of any document proving that the association actually had authority over my property. There was no reference to my deed, no recorded covenant, and no county filing connecting my land to their organization. I smiled, scanned the entire letter into my computer, placed the original inside a labeled binder, and continued with my day. Over the next 2 weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Another letter appeared, this time using stronger language. Then came an electronic mail message repeating the same claims almost word for word. A voicemail arrived the following afternoon requesting that I contact the association immediately before they were forced to pursue further action. Every message carried the same assumption that if they sounded confident enough, I would simply accept their version of reality. I responded to none of them. Instead, I documented everything. Every envelope was photographed before being opened. Every voicemail was saved in multiple formats. Every electronic mail message was downloaded with its complete transmission information. I created folders arranged by date, then by type of communication, until the timeline practically organized itself. My years as an electrical contractor had taught me that small details often solved the biggest problems. A single misplaced wire could shut down an entire building, and a single overlooked document could completely change the outcome of a legal dispute. Brenda, however, seemed to mistake patience for fear. She returned twice that month, each visit accompanied by different board members who parked outside my entrance and examined the fence from the public road. They took photographs, pointed toward the warning signs, and occasionally glanced toward my workshop, apparently hoping I would walk outside and argue with them. I never gave them that opportunity. My security cameras quietly captured every visit with clear timestamps, while motion alerts automatically backed each recording onto secure storage before I even reviewed them. One Saturday morning, I watched from inside the workshop as Brenda stood near the entrance holding another folder. She spoke animatedly to the group around her, occasionally gesturing toward my property as though she were explaining how they would eventually gain control over the situation. I could not hear the conversation from that distance, but I did not need to. The cameras recorded everything that occurred within their field of view, and that was enough. Later that afternoon, I received a certified letter requiring my signature. Inside was a formal notice accusing me of failing to comply with HOA regulations and warning that additional legal remedies were being considered. Once again, there was still no evidence that my land belonged under HOA jurisdiction. I added the notice to the growing binder, updated my timeline, and highlighted each unsupported claim with a yellow marker. By then, I realized something Brenda still had not. She believed every new threat increased the pressure on me. In reality, every letter, every visit, every recorded statement, and every unsupported demand was quietly strengthening the case that I had not even needed to file. By the beginning of the next month, my filing cabinet contained more HOA correspondence than utility bills, but that was exactly where I wanted the situation to be. Every new document strengthened a timeline that was becoming impossible to dispute. Instead of reacting emotionally, I treated the entire disagreement the same way I approached a complicated commercial electrical project. Every step required documentation. Every decision needed verification. Every question deserved an answer supported by records instead of opinions. Although my fence had already been installed legally, I decided to review every part of the project one more time. I contacted the county office and requested certified copies of the recorded property survey that had established my boundary lines. I also obtained additional copies of the permits and inspection approvals that had already been issued before construction began. The clerk recognized my address almost immediately and casually mentioned that everything appeared to be in excellent order. That simple conversation gave me even more confidence that I was standing on solid legal ground. I also scheduled an independent surveyor to revisit the property. Some people might have considered that unnecessary, but I preferred certainty over assumptions. On a bright Tuesday morning, the survey crew arrived with professional equipment and carefully measured every corner marker, every property line, and every section of fencing. Several hours later, the lead surveyor handed me a preliminary report confirming exactly what the original survey had already established. My fence stood entirely within my own property boundaries. Not a single post crossed into neighboring land. I thanked the crew, scanned their report into my growing digital archive, and placed the signed original inside another clearly labeled binder. Over the following week, I upgraded my security system as well. Additional cameras were installed to eliminate every possible blind spot around the entrance gate, the workshop, and the full length of the fence line. Each camera automatically synchronized its internal clock with secure network servers, so every recording carried precise timestamps that could later be verified if necessary. Motion alerts were backed up to multiple storage devices, and I tested every system personally until I knew it functioned exactly as intended. Even the warning signs received another careful inspection. I replaced 2 signs that had become slightly faded from the Texas sun, not because regulations required immediate replacement, but because I wanted every visible detail to demonstrate responsibility rather than negligence. Anyone approaching the fence would have no reasonable excuse for claiming they had not been informed. Meanwhile, Brenda continued behaving as though confidence alone could replace authority. More letters arrived repeating nearly identical demands, and each one carefully avoided addressing the simple question I had asked from the very beginning. None of them identified a recorded covenant attaching my property to the homeowners association. None of them cited any county document granting the association jurisdiction over my land. Their position never became stronger. It simply became louder. One afternoon, my attorney called after reviewing the growing collection of correspondence I had shared with him. He complimented the organization of the evidence and suggested that I continue documenting everything exactly as I had been doing. Then he made a comment that stayed with me. He said that many legal disputes were won long before anyone entered a courtroom because one side prepared while the other side assumed. After ending the call, I looked across the quiet property, listening once again to the gentle clicking of the fence and the wind moving through the oak trees. Brenda believed she was building pressure with every unsupported demand she sent. What she never realized was that while she spent her time writing accusations, I had been constructing something far more powerful than an electric fence. I had been building a complete legal record that left almost nothing to chance. The lawsuit arrived on a Thursday morning by certified mail, delivered with the kind of formality that was clearly meant to intimidate me. I signed the receipt, thanked the delivery driver, and carried the sealed envelope into my workshop without the slightest sense of urgency. The coffee maker was still brewing, sunlight filtered through the high windows, and the familiar smell of sawdust mixed with fresh coffee made the room feel exactly as peaceful as every other morning. I placed the envelope on my workbench beside the growing stack of organized binders before carefully opening it with a letter opener. As expected, the complaint repeated nearly every unsupported claim that had appeared in the previous letters. The homeowners association insisted that my electric fence violated community standards, reduced neighborhood property values, and ignored association regulations. What the complaint still failed to include was the one document that actually mattered. There was still no recorded covenant, no deed restriction, and no county filing establishing that my property belonged under HOA authority. I called my attorney immediately and asked if we could meet that afternoon. When I arrived at his office carrying 2 storage boxes filled with labeled binders, he smiled before I had even reached his conference table. He later admitted that most clients arrived with scattered papers, faded receipts, and vague memories. I had arrived with a complete chronological record that could be followed page by page without guessing about a single event. We spent several hours reviewing every letter, every electronic mail message, every voicemail, every certified mailing receipt, every security camera recording, every permit, every survey, every inspection report, and every photograph documenting the construction of the fence. Occasionally, he would stop reading, look at me, and simply nod before placing another colored tab onto a document he considered especially important. By late afternoon, one side of the conference table had become a detailed timeline beginning with my property purchase and continuing through every interaction with Brenda and the HOA. My attorney explained that the discovery process would require both parties to exchange relevant evidence, sworn statements, and supporting documents. He believed the association expected me to defend myself emotionally, but instead they would be facing carefully organized facts supported by official county records. Before leaving his office, we prepared our initial response to the complaint, denying every allegation that lacked legal support while preserving our right to seek additional remedies if necessary. Over the next several weeks, formal requests for documents began moving between both legal teams. My attorney asked the HOA to produce the recorded documents proving jurisdiction over my land. Their responses included meeting minutes, architectural guidelines, internal correspondence, newsletters, and community policies, but none of those materials established legal authority over my property. Every production seemed to answer questions nobody had asked while avoiding the one issue that would determine the entire case. Meanwhile, I continued living my normal routine. I completed electrical projects for longtime clients, maintained the property, inspected the fence every weekend, and quietly added new records to the filing cabinet whenever another legal document arrived. Brenda, however, appeared increasingly determined to push forward. Additional correspondence suggested complete confidence that the court would enforce HOA rules against me. My attorney simply filed each new document into our growing record without comment. One evening, after another long day of work, I stood outside watching the sunset paint the Texas sky with deep shades of orange and gold, while the steady clicking of the fence blended with the sounds of distant cattle. It occurred to me that the lawsuit itself had become the final piece I needed. By choosing to take the dispute into a courtroom, Brenda had unknowingly placed every unsupported decision, every written demand, and every assumption about her authority into a public legal process where evidence would matter far more than confidence. The months leading up to the hearing passed with far less drama than most people would expect, yet they demanded more discipline than any confrontation ever could. Discovery moved forward according to the court schedule, and every few days another package of documents arrived either from my attorney or from the attorneys representing the homeowners association. I developed a routine that became almost automatic. Before leaving for work each morning, I checked the secure document portal, reviewed any new filings, and updated the master timeline that now covered nearly an entire conference room wall inside my attorney's office. Every event had its own place. The purchase of my property, the county survey, the building permits, the inspection approvals, the installation of the fence, Brenda's first visit, every letter, every electronic mail message, every recorded voicemail, every certified mailing receipt, every security camera recording, every legal filing. Looking at the completed timeline almost felt like watching the entire dispute unfold from above, and one pattern became impossible to ignore. While my evidence followed a clear and logical sequence supported by official records, the association's position depended almost entirely upon repeating the same unsupported assumption that they somehow possessed authority over land that county records consistently identified as independent. During one meeting, my attorney spread several binders across the conference table and quietly walked me through the arguments we expected to hear during the hearing. He explained that confidence inside a courtroom carried very little weight unless it was supported by admissible evidence. That statement reminded me of something my father used to say while teaching me electrical work. Electricity did not care about opinions. It only responded to facts. The law, I was beginning to realize, worked much the same way. We carefully reviewed every exhibit we intended to introduce. Enlarged copies of the certified surveys were prepared. County parcel maps clearly identifying my property boundaries were organized beside the permits and inspection reports. Photographs of every warning sign along the fence were printed in high resolution with dates confirming when they had been installed. The security camera recordings were transferred onto multiple storage devices, each verified to ensure that the timestamps matched perfectly with the original files. Nothing was left to chance. Meanwhile, the homeowners association continued filing documents that appeared increasingly repetitive. Their attorney requested additional information several times, and each request received complete responses supported by records that had already existed long before the dispute began. In return, we continued asking for the single document proving HOA jurisdiction over my property. The answer never changed because no such document appeared. Even so, Brenda never seemed willing to reconsider her position. Through depositions and written statements, she continued describing my property as though it naturally belonged under association control despite every official county record indicating otherwise. My attorney later explained that once someone committed to a weak legal position repeatedly under oath, changing direction became far more difficult. As the hearing date finally approached, I felt surprisingly calm. I spent the evening before court performing my usual routine around the property, checking the fence, walking past the warning signs, and locking the workshop before watching the Texas sunset settle beyond the trees. The quiet clicking of the fence sounded exactly as it had on the afternoon this entire conflict began. Nothing about the land had changed. The only difference was that tomorrow every careful decision, every organized binder, every official record, and every patient response would finally be placed before a judge who would evaluate facts instead of assumptions. The courthouse looked exactly the way I imagined justice should look: solid, quiet, and completely uninterested in personalities. Early morning sunlight reflected across the limestone entrance as I walked through the security checkpoint carrying only a leather briefcase, while my attorney followed behind with several neatly organized binders that had taken months to assemble. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations between attorneys, clerks, and other people waiting for their hearings. Across the room, Brenda stood beside the HOA attorney, speaking confidently, with several board members who had attended to watch what they clearly expected would be a straightforward victory. She glanced toward me more than once, but I simply nodded politely before taking a seat beside my attorney. Years of electrical work had taught me that careful preparation created its own kind of confidence, and I felt that same calm certainty while listening to the steady sound of people entering and leaving nearby courtrooms. When our case was finally called, everyone stood as the judge entered and the hearing officially began. The HOA attorney opened first, arguing that my electric fence conflicted with neighborhood standards and created unnecessary concerns for surrounding property owners. He described the association as acting in the best interests of the community and emphasized the importance of maintaining consistent appearance and safety throughout the area. The presentation sounded polished, but I immediately noticed something my attorney had predicted weeks earlier. Throughout the opening argument, there was still no explanation for how the homeowners association actually possessed legal authority over my land. When it became our turn, my attorney stood, thanked the court, and began with the county parcel map instead of the fence itself. A large certified copy was placed before the judge, clearly identifying my property boundaries exactly as they had existed since the day I purchased the land. Next came the recorded deed, followed by the certified surveys completed both before and after construction. Every document confirmed the same simple fact. My fence stood entirely within my own property, and my property existed outside the jurisdiction claimed by the association. Then the permits appeared: building approvals, inspection reports, contractor records, high-resolution photographs showing every warning sign placed along the fence exactly where regulations required. Finally, the security camera recordings were introduced. The first recording showed Brenda arriving at my entrance gate on the afternoon the fence had been completed. The timestamp matched the records already included in our timeline. The judge watched quietly as Brenda stated that the association would remove the fence whether I agreed or not. Additional recordings documented later visits by HOA representatives, while certified letters displayed beside the videos repeated the same unsupported claims that my property somehow belonged under HOA control. My attorney carefully aligned each exhibit with the corresponding date on the master timeline until every event flowed naturally from one piece of evidence to the next. The judge occasionally asked brief questions regarding permit dates, survey certifications, and county filings. Each answer came directly from official records already sitting on the evidence table. Then came the question everyone in the courtroom seemed to anticipate. The judge asked the HOA attorney to identify the recorded covenant, deed restriction, or other legal instrument granting the association authority over my specific property. For the first time that morning, the confident rhythm of the opposing presentation came to a complete stop. Several documents were reviewed. Quiet conversations took place between Brenda and her attorney. More papers were examined. Yet the single document that had never appeared during months of correspondence still could not be produced. Sitting quietly beside my attorney, I realized every small decision I had made from the very first afternoon, every recording, every photograph, every permit, every survey, every binder, and every carefully labeled page had returned exactly when it mattered most. The courtroom became noticeably quieter after the judge finished reviewing the final exhibit. No dramatic speeches followed, and no sudden revelation changed the facts that had already been established over several hours of testimony and documentary evidence. Instead, the judge methodically returned to the central issue that had been present since the first letter arrived in my mailbox months earlier. He reviewed the certified county parcel maps once more, compared them with the recorded deed, examined both independent surveys, and confirmed that every legal description identified my property as separate from the homeowners association. He then addressed the permits, inspection reports, and photographs documenting the construction of the fence. Each document had been issued or verified by the appropriate county authority, and each one supported the conclusion that the installation complied with the applicable regulations governing agricultural fencing in that area of Texas. The judge paused briefly before turning his attention back to the HOA attorney. He asked one final time whether any recorded covenant, deed restriction, annexation document, or other legally enforceable instrument existed that placed my land under the jurisdiction of the association. Once again, the answer remained unchanged. The attorney acknowledged that no such recorded document had been presented to the court. Brenda remained seated beside him, her earlier confidence replaced by a quiet expression as the legal foundation beneath the association's position continued to disappear. The judge explained that private associations could only exercise authority granted through properly recorded legal instruments, and that assumptions, neighborhood customs, internal policies, or long-standing expectations could not expand jurisdiction beyond those recorded rights. He noted that community guidelines might govern participating members, but they could not be imposed upon property owners whose land had never been legally subjected to those restrictions. Those words carried far more weight than any emotional argument either side could have made. After reviewing the remaining filings, the judge announced his ruling. The Homeowners Association had failed to establish legal authority over my property. The electric fence had been constructed entirely within my recorded property boundaries. The permits and inspections demonstrated compliance with applicable local requirements, and the evidence presented by my legal team consistently supported those conclusions. Accordingly, the court found no legal basis requiring removal of the fence or enforcement of HOA rules against my property. Hearing those words did not produce the overwhelming excitement that many people imagine accompanies victory. Instead, I felt an unexpected sense of quiet relief. Months of careful preparation had finally reached their natural conclusion, not because of a clever argument or dramatic surprise, but because every fact had been verified long before the hearing ever began. As the judge concluded the proceeding, he encouraged both parties to respect clearly established property rights and resolve future disagreements through proper legal channels rather than unsupported assumptions. My attorney shook my hand with a calm smile that reflected satisfaction rather than celebration. We slowly gathered the binders, photographs, maps, permits, surveys, and recordings that had occupied nearly the entire counsel table throughout the hearing. Across the courtroom, Brenda and the board members quietly organized their own files before leaving through the opposite doorway. There were no raised voices, no confrontation, and no final exchange between us. None was necessary. The official record now spoke far more clearly than either of us ever could. As I stepped outside into the warm Texas afternoon, I realized that the fence itself had never truly been on trial. The real question had always been whether careful preparation and documented truth could withstand unsupported authority, and the court had answered that question with unmistakable clarity. Several months passed before I truly appreciated what had changed. At first glance, everything looked almost exactly the way it had before the conflict ever began. The electric fence still followed the same property line beneath the wide Texas sky. The bright yellow warning signs remained clean and easy to read. My pickup truck still sat outside the workshop every morning before sunrise, and the familiar sound of the fence quietly pulsing across 5 peaceful acres blended with the wind moving through the oak trees. Yet something important had shifted, not only on my property, but in the way people around me viewed it. The unexpected visits stopped completely. No additional letters appeared in my mailbox. No unfamiliar vehicle slowed beside the entrance gate to photograph the fence anymore. Life gradually returned to the routine I had wanted from the very beginning. My days once again revolved around electrical projects, service calls, and evenings spent maintaining the land I had worked so hard to purchase. One Saturday afternoon, while replacing a weathered section of wooden fencing near the workshop, one of my neighboring ranchers drove over with a homemade peach pie as a simple gesture of congratulations. We stood beneath the shade of an old oak tree talking about work, weather, and cattle far longer than we discussed the lawsuit itself. Before leaving, he smiled and said something that stayed with me. He told me that people often assumed standing up for your rights required making the most noise, but sometimes the strongest response was simply refusing to abandon the truth. I thought about those words often during the weeks that followed. Inside my workshop, the filing cabinet remained exactly where it had always been. Every binder still occupied its labeled shelf. The deed, the county surveys, the permits, the inspection reports, the certified letters, the electronic mail messages, the voicemail records, the photographs, the security camera recordings, the courtroom exhibits. Even though the case had ended, I never threw any of them away. Those binders represented more than paperwork. They reminded me that preparation creates confidence long before difficult moments ever arrive. Looking back, I realized the electric fence had never been the true center of the story. The fence simply revealed a much larger question about respecting boundaries, understanding the law, and recognizing that authority only exists where it has been properly established. Brenda believed confidence alone could replace legal documentation. I believe documents should always speak louder than assumptions. In the end, neither personality nor emotion decided the outcome. Official records did. Sometimes friends ask whether I would handle everything differently if I could go back to the day the first HOA vehicle rolled into my driveway. My answer has always remained the same. I would install the same fence. I would obtain the same permits. I would organize the same records. I would activate the same cameras. I would answer every unsupported accusation with the same patience because every careful decision eventually became another piece of the truth. Standing at my entrance gate now, watching another Texas sunset settle across the pasture while the steady clicking of the fence fades into the evening breeze, I understand something that no courtroom could ever fully explain. Justice rarely arrives all at once. More often, it is built one document, one honest decision, one careful record, and one patient day at a time until the facts become impossible to ignore. The loudest voices may attract attention for a while, but they eventually fade. Well-prepared truth lasts much longer, and in the end, the law rewards preparation, not volume.